Hello, everyone. This is Glorf.
I am Fort.
And the Doug.
We are here for another podcast about all things Sanderson. Today, we're going to introduce ourselves by going through something Dragonsteel posted for National Book Lovers Day. It's a little question about your favorite things that have to do with the Cosmere. So I'm going to put up here what we're going to be going over. Fort, do you want to tell us first your answers to these? Actually, we'll do them all together. So, Fort, what is your favorite Cosmere book?
My favorite Cosmere book that I've read so far is Oathbringer.
What about you, Doug?
So I'm gonna go with Oathbringer again because here's the thing: is that there's all of Sanderson's books are fantastic. Let's get this straight here. Amazing, every one of them. That's why we have a whole podcast dedicated to them. But it's when Dalinar says, "You cannot have my pain," spoiler alert, and makes the oath that each time I fall, I will take responsibility for what I have done. And if each time I fall, I will rise a better man. To me, that's one of the most powerful sentiments like ever. It's that we take ownership for what we do. And although it might seem crushing, by taking that ownership, by having that agency, we also overcome. We are acknowledging our ability to become better each day. So that's why I've got to go with Oathbringer as well.
I agree with that completely. One of my favorite quotes is from that exact same part, but it's where, he says that he hasn't been four different men. He has been 1,000 different men, that each step is a different person. The hardest step a man can take that he finally comes to realize at the end is always the next one. Because sometimes it is. It's always, the next one is always the hardest.
You guys make a mean argument for Oathbringer. It's hard because there's different, like, what's the most, like, deep. Like, Oathbringer is one of the most, like, deep, soul-touching, soul-wrenching books. But at the same time, one of my favorites is also Hero of Ages because it is just, like, I don't know, it's the pinnacle of everything Mistborn is leading up to. And I might have to say that one just to be the only one who doesn't say Oathbringer, because I love that pinnacle of villain. Is that how the ship name for Elend and Vin?
I would not go with villain. That sounds bad.
That was on accident. But it's like the pinnacle of Vin and Ellen's relationship, where they realize how different they are and they have to trust each other. They work well together when one of them has ascended to a shard. So Oathbringer is wonderful and I love it, but I'd put it almost on the same level as Hero of Ages. Hero of Ages, I feel is a little less appreciated because it's Mistborn and not part of Stormlight, which is Sanderson's magnum opus.
I want to say Mistborn is my favorite series. I love the Mistborn series. It is my favorite one. Specific individual books is Oathbringer, though.
There we go.
I'll put that out there on the record.
So the next question is favorite magic system. I'll start this one off. That for me, my favorite magic system, I feel like there's only really two magic systems that have been well defined at this point. You've got Allomancy. Well, sorry, I should rephrase that. The Scadrian-based magic system and the Rosharan magic system, Surge Binding. And I feel like everything else, we have a look at it, but like we still don't know a whole lot about Aeons and how they work, the Elantrians and whatnot. So for me, I love Allomancy the most because it seems, I don't know, like Surge Binding, there's just so much it can do. It seems so big. I mean, people are talking about, using gravity to affect time and whatnot. But for me, Allomancy is it's more balanced. It's
a very hard magic system.
Yeah, it's more balanced, it's more well developed, and it just kind of, I like the way that it doesn't totally overhaul everything about how we believe the world works. It's just like, let's if we just change this little piece. So for me, I find it the most fascinating. You want to go next for us, Glorf?
Yeah, maybe you wouldn't agree with this one because it's not as well defined, but it's only the thing with Aeons, and then in this case, Breath, is they only have one book to be explored. So mine is a tie. I love Surge Binding. I think Surge Binding, honestly, it's just the idea of like glowing with light as you do magic. And I love the the kind of like the connection, the way that the different surges, right, interact with each other. Like bondsmiths and windrunners share surge, but they work so differently for each one, right? But I also really like breath, because the idea with breath is everyone has a little bit of it. Now there has to be some sort of like, morally, to actually use the breath for magic purposes, it's a little morally gray. But I love the fact that breath is something that every person can potentially do, instead of it being something genetic or a result of a broken spirit web, right? You can have one of the happiest people on earth be able to do cool things with breath just because they have it. And then it is cool that it is a little piece of investiture as part of each person, even if they don't use it, like to build little straw men that go steal things, So that's part of the reason I like breath as well.
Okay, breath is very interesting, and I'm going to agree with the Doug, also with Lord, but my favorite magic system is actually Aeon Door, because of the vast amount of things you can do with it. Hoyd has been trying to get his hands on this for years, for decades, for thousands of years, as we've seen. Because in I think the 10th anniversary edition of Elantris, Brandon puts in a little snippet back there when Hoyd is talking to a Skaze, and for those who don't know what a Skaze is, if you have a Seon, which is like a white light, from what I remember, it's like a white ball with an Aeon. A Skaze is a dark ball that's like from the other shard. Because it's Dominion, Devotion, and it's from the other one. And he was trying to go there to be a Lantrian, and he's able to do it. But then we see in Stress where he's able to go and do that, and how much effort and how long he's been trying to get it with all the things you can do with Aeon Door, I think is just awesome. Yes, we haven't explored it much, but there are at least 2 more books coming out, because Cell is supposed to be a trilogy. So we will see more. If I could have one of the magic systems, I would pick Aeon Door, because yeah, you can do probably just about anything with it, as we've seen so far.
And that is one thing about Aeon Door, where there's so much unexplored. Like Stormlight's cool, and we're getting, and so's Allomancy, but there's so much more we can learn about Aeon Door than I think any other magic system. I think that's one that will have the most surprises in store, which is fun. Okay, next question is Knight Radiant Order. We did that last week. Is a review. I am an Edge Dancer. The Doug is a Skybreaker, and Fort, you are a Windrunner, I believe.
Correct. Yep.
Oh, next one's difficult. Favorite Cosmere character. I'm not going to start this. Well, no, I'll start this one. I'm pretty sure each of us is going to have a 2 to 3-way tie, but I feel like, can we choose a favorite character from each planet? Mine's probably
where do we define from a planet?
Oh,
how do we define that?
So if I had to split it, geez,
we can go top 3.
Top 3. I'll do that in no particular order. I love Raoden, Sylphrena, and Elend. They're 3 of my very favorites. I love Raoden. I feel like if I were to be a Cosmere character, I'd be Raoden. Okay, Doug.
I think my top 3, I'm assuming I'm going last because the Doug isn't talking, but Hoyd is one of my top favorite characters. He appears everywhere. We also don't really know what's going on with him, and the big thing that he has going on in Stormlight is just always awesome. He's always just kind of around. Hoyd is one of my top 3 favorite characters. I also want to say Rock. Rock is also one of my other favorite characters. He cares about people, and we don't really know what's going on with him. Hopefully he doesn't die, as a lot of people think he will after pulling the shard bow.
Way to spoil the mood, Fort.
Always. That's my job. To spoil the mood spoiler, Fort. My other 3rd favorite, it's probably Pattern. Pattern's just very interesting. Pattern. Yeah, I like Pattern. He's just so interesting. Like dividing by 0. Just
I don't know. If we're talking about interesting cryptics I find interesting. I've got to say, design is very interesting in a certain way.
Ugh. I still am interested someday to see how Hoyd managed to make that like a permanent light weaving for her. Like that's pretty cool.
As for
Is
my
it a
favorite
permanent one or is it
character,
only a temporary permanent one?
Oh, there you go. Okay, Doug, what's your favorite character?
4 words for you people. I am a stick.
Okay.
I am a stick. Stick. Come on.
Stick. Almighty powerful stick. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, hasn't it been said Stick is the most powerful being in the entire Cosmere?
It's very likely. He's a stick.
Yes.
So
I feel like I've seen a t-shirt once that has a stick that says I am a stick on it. Okay. First Sanderson book.
I'll
We
take
were
this one.
all Way of Kings, right?
Yeah. So here's the story. I had a long drive ahead of me, had to drop Glorf off somewhere, and had a 4-hour drive ahead of me back home. Now I asked one of my coworkers, "Hey, what's a book you recommend?" He's all like, "Way of Kings." I'm all like, "Okay, I will listen to this book. I'll get it on Audible. I'll listen to it, see what's up." Started listening. I was like, "I'm pretty interested." And then about 2 weeks later, I would get home, and Glorf would be wondering where's the Doug? Where's the Doug? He's not here. And then she'd look outside in the garage, and I'd be sitting there hunched over the radio screaming at it because I've been hooked on it. And of course, having this great joy in my life, I had to share it with Glorf, who I
I was
remember.
really curious, like what book was keeping you in the garage when you could have been home with me. Instead, you were listening to a book, and I had to know what was so awesome about it.
Yeah. So I remember the moment I realized she was hooked forever is we were listening to it, and I turned over and looked at her, and she was shaking uncontrollably. I was a little bit worried, of course. When the spoiler alert, Stormlight 1, we had just finished Tian's death scene, and I'd paused it to see how she was doing. And I look over at her, and she's just weeping, and tears are coming down her face. And then
It is a bad scene.
she repeats the line that she's used every single Sanderson book she's read thus far. At some point, she says, "This is a stupid book, and I hate Brandon Sanderson, and I'm never listening to this again." Like clockwork, every single book.
Yeah.
I remember when we were listening to Yumi, she said, told you the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So how do you get hooked, though?
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a conversation that we were having one time, that you were having with a few other people, and I was like listening now, I'm like hearing all these weird things, weird names, and I'm like, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. And they're like, oh, it's the Way of Kings. And I'm like, what is this? Some self-help book or something? Like, that's what it sounded like to me. Like, oh, this is how kings work, like in ancient times. It sounded like self-help book. I'm like, okay, sure. And then I got I remember sitting there thinking the very first time I read it, I'm like, is this person dead or not? Because it opens up with like, oh yeah, I've died like 30 times. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I didn't understand what was going on for most of the book. Even when we saw the chasm fiend, I had no idea what was going on. I'm like, something with a thing is going. But I got hooked for sure, especially just the honor chasm. Honor chasm was a really big part. I really like the honor chasm. When Syl comes up to give Kaladin the leaf, and it just, oh my gosh, that was so heartfelt and amazing. I loved it.
And now, 5 books later, 5 books, Stormlight books, whole Cosmere later, and we still have no idea what's going on.
It's true. He's got to get us. He's got to string us along 10 books. Can't give us all the answers now.
That's true. True.
All right. And so, last but not least, what, in your opinion, is the book with the best Sanderlanche? Fort, you start this one off.
In my opinion, the one with the best Sanderlanche, I think, is Oathbringer. Just like I know a lot of the fan community kind of already theorized about it, but I wasn't in the fandom at all. I got in late after Oathbringer was here when he was working on Rhythm of Wars, and so I didn't even think that humans were not from Roshar whatsoever. And so with that and just the collapse of the entire thing going all around, just like so much is happening all at once in Dalinar's life that I could feel it. And it's like, oh my gosh, the Radiance broke the oaths. Humans aren't from Roshar. This is happening with Amaran's army. Dalinar killed his wife. He has to figure, and just everything that just been just like was just intense. And yeah, it's one of the reasons Oathbringer is my favorite.
I have to agree with Oathbringer having the best Sanderlanche. So when the Perpendicularity opens and Kaladin and Adolin and Shallan all fall through back into the Thaylen City in the middle of this crazy thing that's going on, and then you have kind of the little flash to Taln, right? There's just like that itty bitty little bit of him, like with, geez, Ash.
Yeah.
And so there, I just imagine it as like this someday, if anyone knows a good like painter artist that, you know, takes requests, I just imagine it like this glorious Avengers Assemble moment with Dalinar in the forefront. You got the two in the back, Ash and Talon in the very back. You got like Lift and Zeth to one side, you know, Adolin like leaning on Kaladin with Shallan and her notebook right next to him. Like it's just like this awesome. Like I would love to like have that as a mural in my house because it's just this beautiful. I mean, and that's just one single part of the Sanderlanche, but it is just this Avengers Assemble moment on top of everything falling apart and then coming back together. It's awesome. Doug, you gonna take a turn?
Sorry, had some audio problems. So, if anybody out there listening takes commissions, reach out to us, hit us up. Glorf will pay good money for a picture like that. I've got to go with. Here's where I'm going to disagree. When we say Sanderlanche, I mean I'm not going to say it's like the most emotionally impactful. For me, the best Sanderlanche was actually, in my opinion, Well of Ascension. And here's why. It's because there are so many different threads going on during Well of Ascension, and all of them kind of culminate in this Sanderlanche that just keeps going. And that's the thing that I love about it, is that you get the first Sanderlanche, which is when Vin realizes, spoiler alert, by the way, for Well of Ascension, Vin realizes, oh crap, these people have been lying to us. They're all going to get themselves killed. I need to go back and save them. And then she has the realization about controlling the Koloss. And then we have also the huge Sanderlanche, which for me, best story in the best storyline in Mistborn was Sazed's, okay, Era 1. And so you get the Tindwyl and Sazed storyline capping up, okay, which is a huge deal. And then right after that, Ellen finds out, hey, I'm in charge of Luthadel again. But wait, the Sanderlanche isn't over. We're going to go visit the well. And then suddenly Marsh is out of nowhere. And then suddenly Sazed's fighting Marsh. And then suddenly Preservation's stabbing Ellen. And it's just, everything's crazy. Our pets' heads are falling off. And it just keeps going. That sustained intensity is sustained. So I'm going to go with that one. The other one, I think that was a really great Sanderlanche, though. Got to give honorable mention to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, okay? Because it's just going and it's going and it's going, and the Sanderlanche just suddenly, one moment you've got the story, and the next moment, boom, you got yourself a Sanderlanche going on, and it just, so I'm going to throw that out there.
I remember we talked about Yumi Sanderlanche last time on the podcast, and that was, and I agree, especially with the Well of Ascension, the Sanderlanche that happens there doesn't just end there because it's a cliffhanger, right? It's a big cliffhanger at the end of Well of Ascension that goes into the next one. Like it gets enough resolved, but not enough. Like it's still the Sanderlanche right at the end where you like, I have to know what happens in book 3.
You make some good points, Doug. You make some good points.
The Doug always makes good points. So with that, we're going to move over to turn the time over to Fort for Sanderson news.
Yeah, so I don't think there's too much. I have a weekly update that was posted yesterday. He's 66% of the way done with Stormlight 5. I believe 34% done with Skyward Legacy. The sell box is now for sale for those who didn't back it.
Sell for sell.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for non-backers who want it, they can go get that. I don't think there's too much else going on.
Now, the only other thing I remember that he said is that there might be a little bit of a pause in progress for Stormlight because he needs to do some revisions for the beta readers. That was the only other thing I remember him saying that has any sort of really pull on us. But so basically what I got from it is be not dismayed. He will continue writing. He just has to revise for a moment. But so
Two-thirds of the way done. So
yeah, it's good. Okay, short and simple Sanderson news today. Do we want to move on to the book club?
Yeah, excellent. So, book club, which all of you who have been reading along with us have been waiting for anxiously. And
So
we have,
I'm say so from here until we say it is spoiler free other than the prologue and part 1 of Skyward. Those are the only sort of spoilers or anything we'll be discussing, nothing past part 1 and no other Sanderson book from here until we give you the warning at the end. So if you're only here for the book club, this is where you start.
Yep, and we apologize. I realized last week that our podcasts have a delay between the time we film them and the time they go out, and so you may need to. So, in order to be on time with us by the time Defiant comes out, you'll need to be a little bit ahead of us. So, if you're following along with when we release, you'll need to probably shove 2 weeks into one or something. But Skyward prologue and part 1. So here's the recap. We meet girl named Spencer, and she's with her dad under the caves, and then he gets a call. Her dad's a pilot, a fighter pilot. He gets a call. Their special base is about to be destroyed. Their rebel base, the rebel base, exactly like on Hoth, is about to be destroyed. He gets a call that he needs to go on right away. So he leaves her there, and tells her go home, and he runs over to the base, and they fight the Battle of Alta, wherein the DDF, Defiance Defense Force, first formally gets established and paves the way for the human resistance to resist the evil Krell. Well, that's the prologue, and then we cut to 15 years later. 15 years later?
I don't think so, because she was 9, wasn't she?
I think it's like 11 years later.
Okay.
I think she was 8, and then
okay.
part 1, chapter 1 starts when she is 17, because that's the age where she can take the pilot test.
Okay.
So cut to 9 years later, and Spencer is hunting rats in the cave system surrounding Igneous Cavern, where the people that are not fighters, pilots and whatnot, live underground, where humanity survives underground. And it turns out that her family has been disgraced and dishonored because her father, in the Battle of Alta, fled like a coward and got shot down by his own squad in retribution. Now, in order to make up for it, she has set her entire life around the idea of becoming a pilot and avenging her father's memory and proving she's not a coward. And her whole life is all about, I want to go and be a pilot. And in this society, when you finish school, they give you you can apply for a test. You take a test and they tell you what job you're going to do. And you can apply for like the pilot's test and whatnot. Well, she finds out through her teacher that they've said she's never allowed to be a pilot. She shouldn't even bother showing up for the test. They're not going to let her in. She gets peeved about this and she runs off into the caverns and she's really devastated. And then she's all like, wait, maybe it's just telling me I can't take a test is a test itself. And they're trying to see how defiant I really am. She's like, big brain moment, galaxy brain. So she runs in after she almost gets crushed by a falling asteroid, because she winds up on the surface. She gets almost crushed by some falling debris, ends up in a cave, finds a spaceship. She's all like, oh, super cool spaceship. But it's like a bajillion years old. Can't use this. And then she's like, I'm going to go take the test. I'm going to go be defiant. She shows up for the testing center with 1 second to spare. She gets the test, finds out she has a special test only for her that's all about algae growing and nothing about fighting. And she doesn't
That
do very well.
part makes me
Yeah.
angry. I just have to throw it
Yeah.
in there. I
Yeah.
see every time I read that part.
So she gets so depressed that she can't take the test, that she's not allowed in. She gets into a confrontation with the Admiral Ironsides, who says there was never any chance she was going to get in, and she's just so devastated. She just sits in the classroom for hours, and the light janitors come in to turn off the lights, and everybody else is at the party celebrating and whatnot. And she's like, "No, I'll just." And she
Well,
grabs
she ends
one
up.
of she grabs one of the unfinished tests and fills it out because she's like, "I'm gonna." Did she just? Well, then this guy comes in, and he's all like, "Why do you want to be a pilot?" And she says what her dad always told her, because she wants to see the stars. Turns out this dude is actually an instructor at the flight school and her dad's old wingmate, Mongrel. And since he's an instructor at the school, he promises her, she shows up, he will make sure she gets a spot in her class. And that's how part 1 ends. So, what are your impressions, Fort, Glorf? What
Well,
did you
one
like? What did you
important
not
thing
like?
in the overview I think you forgot is Spence's attitude that comes from being the quote unquote daughter of a coward. Um, she like she is too quick to pick a fight. Like I swear, I don't remember if it says it or not, but I wouldn't have been surprised if she would have made a lunge for the Admiral. Like instead of confronting her with her words, I kind of was surprised Spencer didn't confront her with her fists.
Well, and there is a point she almost lunges at the Admiral before her best
Mhm.
friend Rick says, "Yo, what are you doing? You
Oh
can't
yeah, because
touch
she
the
took her
Admiral."
pin. The Admiral took her father's flight
That's
pin.
right. Yeah.
Ugh, I
Yeah.
hate her.
Oh, part 1 is just like most Brandon Sanderson books. It just starts off pretty intense. Like you're not 100% sure what's going on, but you can get enough context of what people are saying to understand. And just, I'm going to say this as big as possible. Like knowing that, her dad was like a traitor and everything, and how that affected everyone, and how everyone still thinks about it, and how they treat Spencer because of everything that happened. Rereading it is a lot more emotional, and in the prologue. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it does. It starts the beginning as you're right. It is similar to other Sanderson books. It's the how do I don't know how to get the accent right, but the emotional damage. Every book.
For me, one of the things I really loved about it is we see Spencer develop as a hot-headed character. And this is in contrast to a lot of the other YA novels, not knocking any other writers, but I've just noticed in a lot of other YA novels, especially the hot-headed first, this viewpoint protagonist character who's hot-headed and knows what's right and whatnot, they would just do everything right at the beginning. And one of the things that for me really showed me just how even at a young adult level, that Brandon does such a great job at characterization is when she fills out the test and the instructor Mongrel comes in and Cobb comes in and looks over the test she did, he does notice that she's missed a couple of questions. And so it's not like Spence is supposed to be perfect right off the bat. All she's got at this point is that she studied her whole life for the test, so she probably knows a thing about piloting and spacecraft, but she's just hot-headed and stubborn, and that's primarily what we know about her at this point, is that she's hot-headed and stubborn. I also love how she is constantly talking about making threats like waving the decapitated head of my enemies on sticks and
I was
swearing
thinking of doing
vengeance.
something like that for me, but I changed it.
Yeah.
I love that she hasn't outgrown it. It's not like I used to do this as a child. It's like, no, I'm an adult and I still do this.
I mean, one thing about the test, the way I read it in reality, is they changed the answer. Because when Mongol went to flight school, the answer is pull back and get help. But now the answer is no, you just go full on ahead and fight. I could be wrong, because Spence's like, well, no, I'm right, obviously, because this is what they taught us. And Mongol was like, well, this is right. So I thought of it more as like a societal difference, is this is what he was taught when he was in school versus this is what they are taught now.
Wonderful. I haven't even thought of that before. So for context, what Fort said, the question was, what do you do when you're outnumbered and overwhelmed? And she writes down, you just go aggressive and attack. And Mongrel responds with, no, you fall back and wait for reinforcements. So that's an interesting viewpoint that they've switched the way they train, because I can't say anything else because of spoilers, but
Yeah.
as you keep reading, it becomes apparent why Mongrel would answer that way and why he would have such an issue with someone answering otherwise.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So let me ask you guys, what was your favorite moment in part one?
When Cobb gave Spencer her father's flight pin back, I don't know if it's specified it was his, but he gave no a cadet's pin. That's what it was. He gave her a cadet's pin, just like right at the end, just like
It's like a little symbol of hope, a little tangible bit of hope in that cadet's pin. Oh, I don't know. That part one just infuriates me. I have like this thing with fairness and people being treated like I hate the idea of being punished for the sins of your parents, and it just made me angry. I had an entire conversation with the Doug about this, where
She
like
says part one makes her angry, but she's lying. The whole dang book makes her
the
angry for the
whole book
most
makes
part.
me angry, yes. But part one is especially bad because you're introduced to this character through like she tries to like get in. She comes back from hunting rats because they can't afford food. And then the people like letting her back into the cavern like refer to as a daughter of a coward, and then like she goes to class and people are making fun of her for being the daughter of a coward. The only decent person you meet is like, well, Rig is nice, but like out of like the I mean you meet probably like a dozen people in part one, and it's like Rig, her mom, and Gran are the only decent ones, and Cobb. But it's like she the I guess part one is very good at getting me on Spence's side for better or for worse. I am definitely on her side by the end of part one.
yeah. Even the guards, like just to the flight test, were just always, or not the caverns, right? She says that they stop her just to make her wait.
Yeah.
Because they can. Just like you're just being rude.
Yeah.
For me, my favorite part, and maybe this is just the literary critic in me, which is I'm a terrible literary critic. But for me, it was after she realizes she has her confrontation with Admiral Ironsides in the classroom, and then she realizes she's not getting into flight school. And instead of, and here's why I think just it speaks to me, is because normally you'd expect somebody to get, especially somebody as hot-headed as we've seen Spencer get angry and throw things and yell and scream and whatnot. But it's not what happens. She gets very empty and she just sits down and she's all like, she doesn't want to move or talk or do anything. She's just had her dream stolen from her. And instead of that making her angry and fighting, it's much more because that's what she was fighting for the whole time. This is what she's been fighting for. Why she's so defiant is she's like, I'm going to go and become a pilot and prove everybody wrong. And now she doesn't have something to fight against. Her dream's been taken and she lost. And instead of like, she's just like, oh, that feels bad. And for me, that's very real. It captures it very really of how it's not just like it gives her a lot more depth as a person. She's not just like, I'm gonna take Admiral's head and I'm gonna put it on a pike and I'm gonna wear her skull as my necklace, you know. So for me, that's what I really loved about it.
I think Brandon does really good with that. Like the majority of his characters, especially with like Cal and his depression, and like Kelsier and Vin with her skittishness, right? Because especially the progression of him. Sorry, went a little sidetracked on that, but Brandon does that a lot with lots of characters.
Well, and I think it even doesn't even say Spencer as she's sitting there. She thinks, I should be angry. I should be throwing things. So she recognizes that it's against her character, but she just can't get herself to get the motivation, even though she knows that, she probably, to fit her personality, she should, quote unquote, she doesn't. And she just can't do it. I think you're right. I really like that insight, Doug.
Excellent. Anybody have any other comments or any other pickings from book club that they were like, oh man, wanted to talk about this?
No, I'm excited to read part two and discuss it next week.
It's good.
Yeah, that's always a problem.
Rereads always fun.
always the problem with part one of a book is it's mostly set in the stage before you really start to get the dynamic part. So excellent. Okay, the next item on the list. So based on a discussion Glorf and I were having about Admiral Ironsides, was we wanted to talk about the worst leaders in the entire Cosmere. Now, Ford in particular, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have some experience with leadership training, correct?
Some, not a whole lot, but
He's being
yes.
modest here. But so we're going to talk about the worst leaders in the Cosmere and what makes them the worst. Now, let's caveat this discussion. Let's frame this discussion for a little bit. A leader can be a bad dude, but not necessarily a bad leader. For example,
and we're back to spoilers, so we can talk about all the aspects of Ironsides, because boy, do I got stuff to say about her.
See, because here's the thing, like Lord Ruler, he did a lot of bad things, but he wasn't a bad leader because he knew what he was trying to accomplish and he was stepping forward on that. And as evidence for that, I'm not a Lord Ruler apologist. I'm not saying the Lord Ruler did nothing wrong. But I mean, even at the end, Ellen's like, you know what? I totally get where he was coming from. And Ellen's greatest fear is he understands the Lord Ruler so well, he worries that he's becoming like him. Now, we contrast that with somebody, now, and there are different types of leaders, like Lord Ruler rules through the fact he's an immortal god emperor. Sadeas rules through political manipulation and conniving. The Blackthorn rules through the fact that he just slaughters his way through everybody. Whereas on the flip side, if we look at bad leaders, we look at Gaz, who can never keep his crew under control. Nobody respects him.
He's very easily bought out.
Exactly. We look at, Admiral Ironsides even. For all her, she's not a bad leader. She's mediocre though, is the problem. And you see this.
Would we say that Elokar is technically a bad leader as well? Because like he didn't really know what was going on. He couldn't control anything, and he never knew who to trust or what to do. Like, because even at the beginning of the book, like he thinks he's being assassinated, so he's like, "Well, I'll just try to assassinate myself and see if anyone takes me seriously."
Yeah.
Elokar's perfect example of a good guy, bad leader, because a leader is defined by who chooses to follow them. So, with that in mind, who would we say are some of the worst leaders in the Cosmere? And Moash is not part of this discussion because whenever anything in the Cosmere or Brandon verse or pretty much any work of fiction is worst anything, Moash is almost always the answer because screw Moash.
Worst leader in all of the Cosmere?
Yeah.
Okay, so Ironsides, she just now Doug was explaining to me why in some situations, especially this is like a kind of like a militarily run dystopian type thing, right?
A society dedicated to a survival struggle by becoming a fascist machine of total war.
Yes, that. That in situations like that, it is understandable to punish the family of a coward, right? Because then it dissuades anyone else from turning around and fleeing. But the fact is she's just so cruel about it. Because Spencer was 8. Spencer didn't do anything wrong. And you see Spencer's desire to be a pilot, all the effort she puts into it. You think Ironsides would jump on that. And it's one thing to just be, your father was a coward, we're not letting you in. And another thing to lean up all close in her face and be like, do you think there was ever a way we could let you in? Or the giving her the separate test, one about algae. That one's just, that was rude and just mean. That was mean-spirited. That wasn't you can't take the test. That would be you hand her a special test that says, girl, don't even try to walk away. No, that was vindictive. And that's why I hate Ironsides. Like, I can understand the whole we can't let anyone else be a coward thing, but at the same time, can't take it out on the daughter. That does not shine well on you as a leader. If you're going to, now looking back, now we realize part of why she was trying to dissuade Spencer was because she believed Asensa had the defect, which was correct, but and you don't want to tell people about that. You don't want to freak people out. They weren't as aware. But still, everything Ironsides could have handled everything with more tact and more decency. And instead, she went the I want to be a terrible person way,
But
right?
like, how does that make her a bad leader? Like that makes her a bad person. But what does she do that makes her a bad leader? Do you feel that
Yeah,
that
I mean, because she's trying to protect the people, like by make because she has the defect, because she is cytonic and everything, right? She is under the influence of the Krell at any time, especially because they don't really understand what it is anymore. Because I think was it her grandmother, or her great grandmother, who was also cytonic.
It's Grand.
Grandma,
well,
like
Grand
she
is, but so is
was,
great grandmother.
Oh yeah, because they worked in the engine room.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but with so much information lost on what cytonics are, how they work, and everything, it's like all they really know is her father was cytonic. You have the defect, whatever you want to call it, and he was manipulated by the Krell to kill his own people.
But at the
And
same
they don't ever want to see that again. So they're doing their best. Like I agree, they probably went too extreme and didn't do it the right way. But to a point, their ends justified the means.
But at the same time, I feel like it would have just made her look more fair if she would have gone, you're the daughter of a coward, you cannot enter. Like just putting her foot down as this is something that has happened, you cannot do it. It's another thing, she just looked mean spirited and other people recognized it as well. Like I feel like Cobb would have fought Ironsides less if Ironsides had been decent about it. I feel like Cobb would not have felt the need to go around if Ironsides had just had this is what it is. This is why it is, even without bringing up the defect. Right? I feel like there would have been less of a reason because then Spencer wouldn't have been disappointed. She wouldn't have been fighting for it. I mean, we wouldn't have a book, obviously. I'm so glad it happened the way it did because we have a story. But that is why I think Ironsides is a bad leader, is I think the way she went about it caused people to question her and to defy her. Whereas if she had been more straightforward and less cruel, people probably would have listened. People, meaning Spencer and Cobb, probably would have listened and argued less.
So
That's
what
my opinion.
you're saying is that she allowed her obsession with Spencer to cloud her effectiveness as a leader and the overall well-being of the DDF.
Yeah.
Does that make
Like,
her the worst leader, though?
maybe not the worst, but I feel like she's in like the bottom 10. Actually, that might be, I don't know. I might just be shoving her down lower than she's actually worth.
I have to get an actual tier list and everything one of
Yeah.
these days. It's all
That's
like the
what we
little
need.
faces.
Next time we're going to tier list. That's where somebody write that down for a future podcast. Tier
Got
listing.
it.
We'll each present our tier list of leaders in the Cosmere. What about you, Fort? Where does Fort stand on who might be the worst leader in the Cosmere?
I think one of the worst leaders in the Cosmere might be Amaram.
Amaranth.
Amaram. He was so perfect. He was so pristine. Everyone loved him. Everyone trusted him. Everyone knew him. But under it all he cared about was basically himself. He killed all of Kaladin's crew to get the shard blade. He lied to Dalinar to get a shard blade. He has done multiple things like this. We don't know how many other smaller things he's had to cover up and hide, but it's just the kind of the same way with Ironside. He handled it completely wrong. Murdering a few people, definitely not right. I mean, these men trust him. They risked their life. They were the only men willing to stand up to a shard bearer with nothing but a few spears. And he rewarded them with death and slavery.
What
But if we're
about his
going off of
argument
the,
is
sorry,
that
go for it, Zach. You're probably going to say the same thing.
yeah, what about his argument that he said we needed trained shard bearers, not a bunch of dark guys who don't know what they're doing to handle for the upcoming desolation?
Oh, see, that was me
With
what I was
that,
going to say. Because if we're looking at quality of leaders, not quality of character, right? Well, what Amaram said was terrible. What he did was terrible. Like people followed him, and that includes his statement about the needing shard bearers, right? Skilled shard bearers. So I guess where do you stand? Where does that argument, does that move you at all, Fort?
no, because I will go back to what the Blackthorn said when he got his shard plate. Any man weighing the shard plate can do just as destructive power as he can, skilled or unskilled. It's better to be skilled, obviously, with it, but just with shard plate, you can be just as hard to kill and just as destructive as the Blackthorn without it.
Okay. So do you feel Amaram was always a bad dude, or that he became bad, that he was always a bad? Sounds like you're saying Amaram was always a bad dude and not that he became bad or corrupted by power.
If he never had to make a hard decision in his life, like if he never had to do something like that before, it wouldn't be so easy for him to do it. He did it pretty easily. Like one of the excuses he said is like, "Oh, the stars said this is the best for the people," but like, it still should have been harder for him if he's never done anything that difficult before.
Well, but the thing is, the shards have like a certain power, a certain draw, right? People will do, like you look at Dalinar's vision back at the fort when people were when the Radiants came and discarded their shards. You had normal people that were friends slaughtering each other. It seems like anything that it wouldn't be so easy before, it just is kind of put out the window when it comes to shards. Not being an Amaram apologist or anything, but that's just I believe it was more he became bad because
He
he
did
was
it
so
again to
trusted.
Dalinar, though.
Huh?
He did it again to Dalinar.
Yes, but again, this is post his first time doing it. It was easier the second time, but the first time it was, I don't know, shard blades are magical in more ways than one, I think. The desire people have to have them.
So, Glorf, you're saying you feel that Amaram eventually was started out good and he was going to be a good person up until the point that he decided that he needed the shards more than Kaladin's men needed to live.
Yes. And you look at it though, because it's also Amaram is known as a good leader well before, right? When Kaladin has the opportunity to join Amaram's army, Amaram has been known for a long time to treat his men well, to do all these things. And I don't know that you can completely live out falsehoods like that, right? I
That
feel
didn't change after he killed Kaladin's men, though. It only changed after he was exposed by another high prince. So who's to say he hasn't ever done anything like that to cover other stuff up? Whether it's an affair, whether it's something a little mischievous, who knows? He had a perfect record all the way up until Dalinar. After slaughtering Kaladin's men, he still had a perfect record.
true. But again, we're back at character rather than leadership. So Doug, what you weigh in on this? You seem to be better at separating the person from the leadership. So what is your view on Amaram?
A good leader does not betray and kill his own people.
See, I mean, and I think that comes down to the essential question of what does it mean to be a leader? And I think that's why it gets murky to say who's the worst leader, especially when we separate leadership capability from personal morality. Can you really separate those things? Like, can a really bad dude, and I think that maybe that's where this discussion hinges on, is Amaram, is he convincing himself at least that he's doing all these things for the good of Roshar and that he's actually trying to protect Roshar, or was he doing it selfishly? Is he just looking for his own aggrandizement and power? And I think that's what the discussion seems to hinge on right now that we're having was Amaram always bad? Did he do everything? Was you defending Roshar an excuse? Or did he really believe himself, or at least try and deceive himself into believing that, he was doing the right thing?
So should we change the question from worst and best to more and less effective? Because that kind of separates the morality of it.
Maybe. But here's where the Doug weighs in. I think I know who possibly the worst leader, because it's a person that we've seen demonstrate leadership capability, but do so poorly, comes in. I'm going to go with Lezian the Pursuer. And here's why. Lezian rules on one principle, force, right? His troops follow him because he's big and scary, and he inspires being scary and harsh and rule by terror in his subjects. I was just reviewing the Coppermind in preparation for this, and it talks about how the one guy that Kaladin lets live, right? Kaladin's a freaking Knight Radiant here. One of the dudes, he cuts up a bunch of dudes, and one dude, he cuts his spear in half, and he's all like, I don't want to kill you, so why don't you run away? And the dude runs away. And what does Lezian do? He punishes him for it. Lezian is a person who is obsessed with himself and his purposes and his goal to the detriment of anything else. And we can talk about how much of that is the fact that he's lost his mind and is mostly spread. But that's the thing, is that if you look at it, Lezian, he's not a leader that tries to do anything. He is a leader that rules through terror and fear. And the problem is, if you look at societies or leaders that rule by this way, the problem is that it ends up everybody becomes afraid of messing up because they know that what happens to people who mess up. And so everybody gets into serious CYA mode and is constantly shifting blame to subordinates. They're constantly looking for excuses, and they become very effective. We can see this demonstrated very well in the during the rule of the Nazis, is that Hitler, one of his problems, he was notoriously ineffective because people were always lying, because they knew if you screwed up, there were serious consequences. In the same way, Lezian, he doesn't think rationally. He doesn't have some sort of, here's how I accomplish my objective. He's just like scary and terror and hurt people and murder and blood. And I don't care who gets in my way. I need to kill whoever killed me. And I'm just going to keep doing it over and over again. And the people who follow me, their lives exist to be spent for that purpose. Now, you could make an argument like, say, oh, the Blackthorn is like that. But the Blackthorn was never about, he didn't like killing for the sake of killing. His was always about the combat and about the thrill of the combat. And to a lesser extent, he knew his place as a tool in his brother's hands. He never went beyond what his brother told him to. And we show the example of this is when he recruits, what's his name? I want to say Cavadash, but I think that's wrong. In the first Dalinar flashback, where they rage that town, and there's the archer, and he shoots at him, and he's all like, hey, that's a good shot. What do you want to join my army? And he's all like, okay, well, spare the town. And Dalinor's all like, okay, let's spare the town. And it's the contrast of that is that Dalinar really was working in his own way for a better world, or what he viewed as a better world. Lezian doesn't care about any of that except himself. And that's why I argue Lezian the Pursuer is the worst leader in the Cosmere. He would be he's ineffective. He doesn't have control. And he doesn't care about anything else. Everybody else, like even Sadeas, he prizes his rule, and the way he leads is by prizing ambition. You do what you need to get ahead. And at the very least, that promotes creativity and outside of the box thinking. That allows, it may lead him to horrible conclusions like, hey, let's just run the bridgemen and we'll not give them shields. But it still, he rewards and he moves up and it produces something. Lezian is just a hammer that just keeps hitting and hitting and hitting until a rock moves. And you're never going to have success that way. So that's where, you tell me, Fort, Glorf, what do you think? Do you think Lezian is a candidate for the worst leader in the Cosmere? Why or why?
I would say yes. A lot of it, I think, comes down to how I think about a leader and thing. A leader is someone who leads people, someone who has the power to do so, someone people will follow. When I think of Lezian, I don't think of him as a leader. Not because he isn't one, but because of what you said. He's just a hammer. He just goes and does whatever he wants. He acts like an individual, even though he is a leader of many people. Like, yeah, he is a very high spot in the fuse, so he does have subordinates and he is a leader. And that's what makes him a bad leader. I can agree with that, because he does do things so individually that he doesn't care about his subordinates.
No, he never, and he doesn't, you're right about the creativity thing. He never changes. He keeps getting beat by Kaladin because he never changes his tactics. He just, and then he does, and then his subordinates don't. Where Lesrian doesn't have a purpose, his subordinates don't have a purpose. And so it's just a bunch of thugs hanging around the tower while Lesrian tries to kill Kaladin for the third time. Like, so yes, actually, I think you have a very good candidate there, the Doug.
Excellent. Well, you readers, listeners, let us know below in the comments who you think the candidate is for the worst leader in the universe, in the Cosmere or the Sanderverse, apart from Moash, because he would be the worst leader. And
Wash
you
is the
let us
worst
know.
at everything.
Exactly.
Debatable.
We'll have this discussion next time. We are planning at some point in the future, dear listeners, an entire series dedicated to the trial of Moash and whether or not he is backed the worst, because he is the worst.
I don't think he's the worst. I think he's the most hated. I've had
Now
this discussion with people, but I'm not saying I like Moash. 100% no.
But we're going to
Like the
close
Dark Side,
with
we'll
our
discuss.
we're going to close with our meme off now. I'll go ahead and start us out. So I've got share. I've got look at me. I am in the flight school now with an image of Spencer superimposed over the head because she gets into the flight school at the end of part 1.
I get it.
You want to go next for us, Glorf?
Yes. I have, so it's the scene from The Simpsons where Mo throws, I can't remember what his face is, out the door, and then he comes back in behind him. So it's Admiral Ironsides throwing Spencer out the door, and then Spencer back in Cops class, back inside the bar. So coming back in from behind, like she didn't actually get kicked out.
I like that one. I love that me and me both have the same kind of theme.
Yeah.
Fort, what do you got for us?
You have to wait for Glorf
Sorry,
to
I'm working on
start.
it. Push the wrong button.
Okay. So I have this meme. It's from Invincible. It's where Omni-Man's son is labeled as Spencer. And so she says, so when do I become a pilot? And he says, that's the neat part. You don't.
I like that one. It's just very succinct, very on point. Excellent.
Oh, that's a good one. I think Fort wins. Listeners, you tell us what you think, but
Yep,
I think
leave your
Fort
comment
wins.
below in the comments. And this is us signing off. This is the Doug saying, what is it that muggers do?
Mug people.
So,
Let's
Let's
mug
go
'em.
mug 'em.
All right, life before death, listeners. Catch you next time.